Hi there. I'm Tomlin's Not Back. This is 365 Days Towards Racial Change. Thanks for keeping up, staying in tune. You know, you can get plenty out of the description. I make them just long enough so it fits. I think you can get about 700 words in there. And the description will do just fine. You don't have to be held hostage by the video, so to speak. But they do work well together, intended to be together. Also, on the group on my email list, private email list, they get the link to the video and the text, so you don't even have to. And many of my subscribers don't even watch the videos. I know this, but it's okay. The videos are fun to make. All right, day 283. White folks, white mind, power, where power resides, how power rests. You know, we just came through the holidays. There's a gap in my timeline here. Don't worry about that. I know there's a gap in the timeline. If you recognize a jump in current events and holidays and things like that, that it just happened because I got busy. But I had brunch with a lot of friends, all white. We're great friends. We have a common interest. We're friends of Bill W. Either you know Bill or not. Hard not to in today's world. But we were all generally friends of Bill W's. That was a good time for brunch on Christmas Day. And what made it equally great was that they had a lot of people brought their dogs, and there were dogs there. I like animals, so it was great for me. And I don't get out much. But I was like, almost always, I was like, always stunned and taken aback because the white folks that I'm with, spend time with, one thing they all have in common is they have space. I think I talked about this yesterday too. Like if I get married, have a relationship and whatnot, we have space. We're not getting together like that. You know, like in the old days, like immature kids just moving in with each other and stuff. Now we're going to have space. That's important. I'm at a point in life. I'm older, obviously, and so there's some wisdom, and I'm at a point where peace of mind is so high up on my list of priorities, you know, and that people have space. You just can't get around that. You've got to have space, and it's irresponsible not to consider that when you are, you know, thinking about being with people, living with people, and things like that. But anyway, you know, at this fine house, fine hostess, and all that, and, you know, white, she had space. You know, and part of it is as well as I grew up with a hoarder where space isn't that concern, not a high list of priorities, which is interesting. You know, why do I value that, not having been exposed to it at an early age? Well, that's another story. You know, but in this world, in this nation, to have space, you got to have resources, access to wealth, and all the other things we've been talking about. You know, so you know, if you're white or any uh, part of the power group, Do you recognize that advantage that most people, you'll find, I believe in general, that it's weird, like resources, um, and access to wealth equals space, right? I talk to, lately I've been talking about, I guess I'm going through my own kind of news cycle of seeing when I'm riding on the train in town where I live and going through, and I look across these fields and these neighborhoods, buildings, or, well, they're houses, but the house is a building, right? The people, when I look at them, it's not so much the opulence, access to wealth, resources, privilege, and all that. I'm thinking of, wow, space so your mind can go out. That's why you go outdoors once in a while and all that. And it's interesting. Like, okay, your resources are limited and all that. It correlates with how much space you have in the world. What you command, call your own, your castle, and all that. Right? I'm in kind of this low income situation right now, and I am right. I'm in my space, and this is good. I wish it would maybe a little bigger. I think I need some shelves in here to get organized. I think I'm done gathering stuff. Went through a gathering phase, not a hoarding phase, but I could use some shelving in here anyway. And with that, I could see the relationship between a space and access to wealth and resources. And so the power group is, not only powerful because maybe their skin color and some of the things we talked about, but they have that space. Maybe they got a gym here. Hey, one of my best buddies, he moved away a couple years ago. Black man, president of a bank. He had one of those buildings, right? He had access to that space. He had a little gym downstairs, and him and his wife had a room, but I think she had another room, and he had two girls, so they didn't even live with him. But if they came, they'd have their room. Like, wow, space. I don't know why I'm going on about that. No, but conversely, black folks, or you gotta be responsible in this world, and I heard this years ago about, if you're going to have a family, you got to be responsible about space. You can't be accidentally populating and jamming and making your space so crowded that people lose a sense of their individuality. Now, I know there's some cultures that have a lot of people in the space. I feel sad for any introverts in that circumstance because I'm an introvert. I don't want a lot of people populating the space with their noise and movements and idiosyncrasies and things like that. Um, from where black people in general are coming from, and some of our healing is going to come, I believe, for a lot of us, and I'm biased as an introvert for what I'm about to say, but we need space. Stop overwhelming the space with bodies, right? I passed a white couple today. God bless them. They had two little kids. They're starting out life. They're obviously in the mid-20s, I guess. Hitting some of the landmarks in life, right? The things that their group instilled in other areas of society, but don't necessarily promote and support, right? You don't have black folks, um, not that I know of, uh, regularly getting married in their 20s and holding that together into perpetuity. That's very rare. I've had maybe some family members experience that and whatnot, but that's not the norm. Yet we're immersed in a society of white, powerful people promoting that, projecting that out into the world. But it's not necessarily promoted back into black life and things like that. Very sad. Very sad. So space. I got a little off topic there. Lost my place. So how do black people manage that shift? Are we just polygamous people? Populating. Oh yeah, that's where I was going. I was going to talk about be responsible. We need to be responsible in our procreation. I would say, where we're a minority numerically, but then at the same time, we don't want to rush and just start spitting out people to run up our numbers. There's got to be a balance between quality and quantity of people happening at the same time, and we really need that to happen. And sometimes when I see these young white couples with their 2 and 3 kids starting out and stuff, I'm like, oh boy, where's the black representation and all that? Bottom line is, black folks are experiencing like kind of attrition going on. If things were absolutely under my control, I would prevent black birth in favor of having black quality birth. Having children born into stable homes and educated, and a collective consciousness of unity instilled, to get us going. Dr. Anderson, we're going to talk about Dr. Anderson in a minute. He informs a lot of what I do, but some of the things that are missing, he touches on them in some of the stuff I've read. But I would ramp up the idea of family procreation and stuff to say, the family, if black people are going to come back and be competitive in the world, in the nation of America, then in the home, the family unit, there has to be some adherence to collective community. That's going to be universal. That'll raise that community up. That's what we see in successful communities other than white, Hmong, Vietnamese, some of these Asian communities, Hispanic community, no doubt. There's some. They've got a collective consciousness going on there that makes them successful and elevating, moving forward up in the land. Like I said, I'm inspired to do this work by a man named Dr. Claude Anderson. I've read 3 of his works. First work I read, A Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. I encourage you to get these books, and he's got a lot of other stuff going on, written a lot. Black Labor, White Wealth, Search for Power and Economic Justice, and Dr. Anderson's National Plan to Empower Black America, Powernomics. You can find Dr. Anderson at powernomics.com. Behind me, you see the hashtag #US2 symbol, Black women coming together, supporting one another, having their community. Check out Black Enough, BLAGGENUF, kind of a Black Facebook experience. Finally, we are back in the story time for the next couple of days. We're almost through with Uncle Tom's Cabin. We had some drama, intrigue, and stuff like that. Tom appears to have come on to some abuse for his obstinance in front of Simon Legree. So let's see how that goes. Day 283, Uncle Tom's Cabin, chapter 41. And it's titled Young Master. We'll find as we get to the end of the book, the chapters are coming more in rapid succession. They're thinner, and Harriet's wrapping some of this stuff up, and we'll see. She'll have a nice little bow on it and see how she wraps things up in the next couple days. Tom has left a considerable impression on his former masters, both in Kentucky and in Louisiana, the Shelbys and the St. Clairs, right? And so much so that if you remember, there's a young George Shelby that was he was very much in love with Tom. He liked Tom a lot, and that's probably a common occurrence, common phenomenon in the slave world. Little white kids get close to these the black slaves. Remember Shirley Temple and Bojangles dancing on the big screen, silver screen, stuff like that. Some of that stuff, the mirroring Eva and Uncle Tom, so to speak. So young George he's been obsessed ever since the day Tom has left. And if you remember the story, Ophelia wrote a letter in favor of Tom to the Shelbys, and it fell through the cracks, and people got busy and stuff and all that. But years later, the letter got to young George. He's old enough to go writing out, and so he's looking for Tom. And a lot of happy events happen to put George on the trail. So George is finally, he's coming down the road towards the Legree plantation. So he comes upon Legree. Legree is sitting in his, like I said, probably dark sitting room, smoking or maybe having drunk that day. And he boasts to young George, little George Shelby. Of course, he's old enough to be out and about. And he says, yeah, I beat Tom. Yeah, I beat Tom with an inch of his life, is the attitude that Legree gives him. And so little George is beside him. So George is like, I want to buy this man back or whatever. George has obviously come with at least $1,500 he's probably carrying on him to purchase Tom. And Legree's like, yeah, he's in the shed out back. He's been there a couple days. We've just been beating on him because he won't tell us anything. And George finds him there. And at that point, they've been at Tom pretty much. It's been torture. Um, and Tom's dying wish, and his last breath, he's loving Jesus still. A lot of promotion about God and such. But he's like, um, I don't want Chloe, that's Tom's wife, to know how I died or what state you found me. So he makes George promise not to tell Chloe his condition. And you remember, like, now that the story's ramping up, we want to remember Prue's story, how she had to hear her baby, her last child, cry, it's starved to death, stuff like that. And then how she became an alcoholic and she was stealing. So they beat her to death, threw her in the basement and just left her down there till the flies had started getting at her and stuff like that. A lot of cruelty. A couple days we're gonna unpack, start to decipher truth and myth about some of these stories, phenomena, and events we've come through in Uncle Tom's Cabin. And so Tom, you think about the slaves. You're going to hear me mention Frederick Douglass' eyewitness account of a slave being shot in the face, how that murder is never accounted for, nobody's brought to justice, things like that. Got Prue's story, here's Tom's story, and just that voiceless human being with no advocate in the middle of a swamp under the pressure and a mighty hand of a filthy white brute person with no moral compass, or his moral compass is always pointing towards his base and his morality. And that's the whole Legree plantation is under darkness because of this brute man. He buys concubines to lay with, drinks a lot, smokes, is okay with killing slaves, torturing slaves, things like that. There's more of this Christian and godlike imagery injected into the narrative. I find it, for some reason at this point, I found it unnecessary. We kind of know Tom's space, his attitude toward God. Tom's dying now, so I think mature human beings have a sense that the dying are just wrapping up, preparing to go on. So I think that there's the language is a little much for my taste in here, but Harriet obviously has this connection with God, and I'd probably have a lot of stuff like that too. For some reason, it didn't fit right with me here. Legree shows up at the door. He's indifferent towards Tom's suffering, lingering death. He is his attitude. This is par for the course. Black people die in the shed. They die tied to the burnt tree out back. That's what happens. They get eaten by dogs. They get chased in swamps. They're raped consistently, burned alive. That's Legree's. He's totally bought into the plan of a dominant race, a master race who can indulge in any and all levels, types of hedonism that they want to. It doesn't matter. It's all good. Um, George is mad because that's George's friend. That's not George's slave, right? You have this interesting appearance. You got power, sick, malevolent, and then you've got power, focused, controlled, benevolent, meeting, right? So this tension starts to creep up, and George threatens to charge Legree with murder, and Legree's like, murder? Well, where's your evidence? Where's your proof? You know, where's your witnesses? What? You talk about a hostile environment. What slave is going to get on the stand and, well, first get on the stand, be believed, and then go back to his plantation and have it be okay? Nah. I think you see that today. I just saw something, little clip on the news cycle. Some government worker getting strange phone calls suddenly because she has resisted the president and stuff like that. The nation's becoming so much more gangsterized on that level. A lot of bad things going on in America. Well, a lot of bad things coming to light. I think these things and pressures have always existed. You find the examples in slavery times, right? Legree he's immune. Who's going to? And Legree has the control over these slaves, dominating them. He knows this. He's not afraid, right? So nothing is going to turn him away from his arrogance. And he's on his land, his castle, his servants, and all this. He's in control. He's comforted. My guess is if he tried to live outside of that space, that'd be his ass. But he knows where his power resides, and he's going with that. No witnesses. The Frederick Douglass incident. No witnesses. That's probably one of the biggest arguments for that slave handler not being brought to trial for shooting a slave in the face, point blank with a shotgun. George is overwhelmed. He's a young man. Legree's, my guess, this is fictional, but Legree, this is I picture as a fat guy with facial hair, tobacco, saliva, sweaty, smelly. Anyway, George is overwhelmed, and he knocks Legree down. The book says, and he bested the bully, and Legree doesn't retaliate, doesn't get up, because bullies, like, once you really like lay into them, and because they're going to push you that far till you snap. That's what they want. That's, even if they're defeated, that's their that's how they that's their experience is fuel for their life. Any kind of negativity or whatever, that's how they get on, how they experience, how they get off on any type of attention like that. After he knocks Legree down, he drafts some of Legree's slaves to help Tom because Tom has died. In the meantime, they take Tom, put him on a wagon, and George is just going down the lane. He's got a shovel. They find a sandy knoll there on the side of the road, and he buries Tom there. Very sad. He's pretty broken up. The slave helpers that help George are like, please spy us. Have mercy on us. And George is like, no, I can't do that. The problem for two reasons. George didn't come to emancipate and find favor with a bunch of strange slaves on a plantation. That's not what he came for. And two, George finally sees that now that Tom has slipped through the cracks and has been murdered by this brutal white man, I think George has come to the space where he's like, the problem is bigger than buying one or two. I've got to attack and approach the system of slavery that's going on in America. And that is little George's resolve as he has just buried his friend, this black man that he loved. I'm going to end it there. We're going to keep on a couple more days in Uncle Tom's cabin. It's not over. We're talking Uncle Tom's cabin. Tom has died, but we want to find that Harriet has some ulterior motives, things going on that she's been working on and working through these many chapters in her book. I'm Thomas Nyback. Come and visit us tomorrow. I'll find out what happens after Tom has been buried. This is 365 Days Towards Racial Change. I'll see you soon.